Thanks
Thanks for listening
to the
Boots
Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Boots Off Podcast. I'm glad to have you here. This is episode 15. I really appreciate the time that you take to listen and your efforts to share and support my little side project here, which I hope can bring value to the veteran community. If you haven't given your rating on Apple Podcasts, it would mean a lot to have your 5-star endorsement. Also, aside from promoting Anchor for being the most user-friendly podcast hosting site that I have found, this is an ad-free podcast. So, to make up for the resources that I put into running this whole production, I do have the Patreon account. So if you would like to chip in, that's patreon.com/bootsoff. It's completely optional, but very much appreciated. The one perk at this moment is that I release the video of each episode the Friday prior over on Patreon. So everyone else gets the standard audio release the following Monday, and you get it Friday. Uncut, full video episode. Anyhow, enough self-promotion, excuse me. What's in the next hour? Dr. Amy Stevens is in the next hour. Very interesting conversation about her time as a naval officer back when female officers were a rarity in the military. We talk about the challenges she faced then and also the unimaginable struggle that she faced when she was medically discharged trying to find a job. Even with her experience as an officer, her higher education with a master's degree, it was a rough road. So we also talk about women's health as well as veterans groups and the importance of community in the battle against veterans suicide. She opens my eyes a little bit more in that portion of the discussion in talking about the suicide rate in older veterans. So not even talking about post 9/11, but those who served well before that. But Dr. Stevens is a very active member of the veteran community in the state of Georgia with her 4,000-member strong group called Georgia Military Women. I found this to be a very important talk. I hope you do as well. Here is episode 15 of the Boots Off Podcast with guest Dr. Amy Stevens.
Actually, I thought about joining the Navy, or not actually the Navy, the Army. Originally, when I got out of high school, I had a cousin who was an Army nurse, and she served in Vietnam. And she used to come home, and it was kind of exciting to see her, and hear a little bit about her adventures. I didn't really know that much about Vietnam, but I knew that this was kind of a cool thing to do. And at the time, I thought I was going to be a nurse. Actually, I ended up going to college and became a broadcaster. So, it was totally different. So I ended up giving up the nursing thing. I started out in nursing, but I didn't like it. So but I had thought about the Army as a way to pay for school originally. And that was in 1971. Then I went through school, had trouble paying for school, almost went down to the end to join the Army. The Army told me that they would give me 3 ranks because I had a little college by then. It was, so I figured it out, private, corporal, sergeant. I thought they were going to make me a sergeant. Not so, because 3 ranks in the Army would have made me maybe a private first class, I think. And so that did not happen. I figured out a way to pay for college. I went on, launched my career as a broadcaster, and most educational television actually is what I did. But there was always this little thing that said, you're young, you like adventure, you like traveling. Will you always regret not joining the military? And so in 1978, I went and talked to the recruiters, came this close, really close to joining the military, and talked myself out of it because I was doing well. I had switched from one job to another. I was by then in Milwaukee. I became an opening came up to be the director of the new medical television program that was being launched at the Medical College of Wisconsin. So it was a great opportunity, I thought, until I ran into politics there. And 6 months later, I decided, I'm 25 years old. I don't need to do this kind of stuff. Why don't I just go ahead and do my adventure stuff? And
Sure.
I went down to the recruiters again. And this time I talked to the Air Force recruiter and he hit on me. So I thought, yeah, that's not why I joined the military. I went to the Navy recruiter. He said I could be a broadcaster in the Navy. So that's actually how come I joined, because I thought I was, getting into broadcasting in the Navy. And I thought that would be very cool.
Yeah. And so at that time, when you went down to the recruiter's office, were you even aware that that was something you could do in the military?
Not completely, but that's kind of what they led me to. Sorry about the dog. He's in the
No
back.
worries.
Is that, yeah, he kind of gave me the impression that that would happen. He also gave me the impression I might get an advanced pay grade, but that didn't work out. I found out all recruiters lie, but, and I became one later, but, so I ended up joining the Navy actually started active duty in January of '79 because I had finished college. I did go in as an officer. And I had no idea that the Navy actually had gone through a very pivotal change. Actually, all services did, because the waves and the WACs and all of those stopped functioning as separate units. The women became integrated with the regular forces. And so there was no longer a separate organization for women service members. So I was one of the very first people to be part of the regular Navy. And I went off to OCS in Newport, Rhode Island, and the rest is history.
So we deal with a lot of discrimination right now, and having to. I mean, I honestly, in these diversity trainings, we'll go around the room, and in the latest instance, I personally have not had any experiences witnessing discrimination in my career, and I've been in joint offices with all kinds of people. So I guess I've just had this luck because I know it exists, and we're obviously living in a very different time than we were back then. So as a woman in the Navy with rank too, did you run into any issues with discrimination?
Absolutely. It started right there at OCS. The Navy chiefs that were our instructors made it very clear that they didn't want any women in their Navy. And I'm a pretty sharp cookie. I actually became a senior officer candidate, and I was offered a lot of opportunities. But like one of the incidents that I've told people about is that, and we are talking 41 almost years ago, on the YPs, the yard patrol boats, we had to practice things like navigation and all of this kind of stuff. And I remember at one point, I'm the senior officer candidate present, and how disrespected I felt by the chief that almost pushed me out of the way, would not take time to work with the women, because he says, ma'am, even the lowest man on this boat right now is going to go to sea in the surface warfare. Is that none of you women are going to go. I see at that time they weren't routinely putting women on ships, right? He says, I'm going to take the extra time with these guys and make sure they get it right. With you women, I don't have time. And it really impacted me, because I was actually offered an opportunity to go on a ship at the end of my OCS career. And it's a 5-month training at the time. They offered me the opportunity to go on a ship. And they also offered me an opportunity to be the officer in charge of a broadcasting station, which was my background. So between the two, I picked broadcasting because I knew what I was doing. I knew I would be excellent. And I knew on the ship, I don't even know if I even thought about maybe becoming a trailblazer. That wasn't really my agenda. I guess I should have, in hindsight, maybe in some ways, but no, I knew I wasn't wanted there. And actually what I found out too, when I got to my Navy broadcasting detachment, is that the person in charge there certainly did not want a woman coming on board. The male chief announced before I got there that when that lady ensign comes, we're going to lock her in her office and never let her out.
Jeez.
That's actually what I was told. And I think it's true. He was actually the only one that gave me a hard time there. But, that was the chief's attitude. So yes, right from the beginning, you saw differences. I can tell you my second duty station, Yokosuka, Japan. Again, I saw that discrimination is that we don't, and this by then, was only a year later. I was a year on isolated duty in Adak, Alaska. Went to some other training and was in Yoko. Again, it was made very clear, I don't have time to deal with women. I know that I've got to do this for the men because, they're basically the backbone of the fleet, is that it's kind of like you don't fit here.
And was there a time that you,
Very directly told to me.
was there a period when you noticed any sort of positive change throughout your career? I mean, that was 11 years that you served, right?
Yeah, I served 11 years on active duty. I would say the worst were my first tours. As far as, really, it was only the chief that was at the first duty station. I felt relatively accepted. And of course, as a, by then 26-year-old, there weren't that many women on the island, and I was very popular. So, that's one of the advantages of being one of the few women, is on a scale of 1 to 10, you're always a 10. So, never had to buy a drink. So I had a good time there. So I didn't mind that. Kind of the same thing in Yokosuka. When you're overseas, you have more of a community feeling. And so the job that I was doing was HRM, Human Resource Management. It was accepted to have females there. We might have had our internal conflicts that you'd have in any small group setting. But generally speaking, didn't have any female related problems. So, that was relatively fine. Probably, let's see, 84. By the time 1984 rolled around, I started seeing a little bit different attitude, more acceptance. But by then I was working as the XO of a reserve center. Didn't really see any discrimination against women. Same thing on telecom in Washington. Communicators at that time tended to be mostly women anyway. So a strong female component, because women tended to still have kind of standard jobs. We mostly did administrative pink jobs. Mm-hmm. They had started integrating women into other programs, but it was more like always a pilot program. So I didn't see any blatant discrimination. What I did see was sexual harassment. That was also, and that's a different topic. As far as general gender discrimination, not as much. That one kind of accepting because of the job roles that we were in. They weren't fighting for the same jobs. So as long as I was not warfare qualified, then it wasn't going to make a difference. But as I said, I did see sexual discrimination as far as sexual harassment. I was never assaulted, but very definitely there were issues almost at every duty station that I was at with that. And that was sometimes very blatant.
I can imagine, because you're still women in the military. You're not a prominent part of the population, right?
Right. Well,
at that point.
Yeah. At that time, especially. So right now, like women are 18 to 20% of all new accessions into the military, all branches. One of the interesting things I just heard about this past year was that the Coast Guard Academy incoming class of freshmen is 50-50 men and women. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Now, the Army is the worst as far as gender discrimination at West Point. The Navy's doing a little bit better, but it's still mostly men. So we're seeing changes on that accession coming in. But generally speaking, we're running 18 to 20% all for enlisted and officers overall. So it's getting better. And of course, all career fields are open. We have Lady Rangers now, Lady Green Berets, it's combat arms, which quite frankly don't appeal to me. I'm a little short thing. I'm, 4'11", is that I don't do that well jumping over 4-foot fences or carrying 100 pounds of stuff. And actually those kinds of things are interesting too now that more women are expected to load up, battle rattle, full load, and in some cases, yes, it weighs as much as the woman does. If you as a male thought you had a heavy load to carry, think about a body structure that is not designed to carry its own weight and has a different structure as far as balance goes. We have a lot of musculoskeletal issues among women. That's actually the #1 disability that women have, is because of equipment that does not fit, and in many cases is too heavy to reasonably expect them to carry. So there's a lot that goes into all of this.
Yeah, so I think, the military is coming around. Would you attribute this evolution to, like, would it be leadership? Just the people that we're putting in leadership positions are there to make these suggestions and changes?
Are we talking reluctant leadership? Is that it's taken a while. I mean, there's always some people that are more welcoming, but it's taken a long time. It is a male environment. We have cultural, expectations that men fight wars and women stay at home. But, that's really not true, because women have always served, starting from the revolution. Women would disguise themselves as men in order to serve. And the only time it would be found out is if they got wounded, is that women especially became prominent in the military, doing jobs that the men could not do during World War I, World War II. We started seeing huge numbers of women stepping up and not getting credit for what they did. I mean, think about the women pilots, the WASPs, that would actually fly the training planes from the States over to Europe. They were not recognized at first. All of those kinds of things, the Rosie the Riveter types of people doing jobs. And so the women have actually always served. And in the more recent wars, until, just recently, officially opening up combat arms, women have been over in Iraq and Afghanistan from the beginning. They would just be labeled as combat support, but being shot at, having an RPG going over, wherever you are is, hey, I consider that combat. You might not be actually engaging directly necessarily, but close enough. And the reality is a lot of the women have engaged and have not been able to tell even. I can think of some of the folks that drive trucks, supply line types of folks. That's it's technically not combat, but if you're out there on the fob and you want your mail and you want your Oreo cookies, somebody's got to bring it to you. And who do you think does that? It's the logs types of people. And so they're out there. And one Marine was telling me once about she and her all-female group were driving some kind of vehicle out in the desert someplace. And Haji rises up with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. She sees him and in awesome military Marine fashion executed one shot, one kill. And then she looks around at her sisters, Marines, and says, oh my God, we're under orders not to shoot at people. But this guy was obviously planning to cause them harm, and she took it out. And I'm a clinician also, so I talk to people. And so she's telling me that her group decided that they would just bury him and not tell their commander. And that's what they did. There was no evidence. So they dug a hole, put him in it, I guess along with his weapon, and that was it. Because she knew she would get into more trouble for telling that she killed somebody than congratulations for doing what she needed to do to save herself and the other people on that truck.
Yeah, I don't doubt that, but what are you supposed to do?
That was early in the Iraq War.
Jeez.
And so and the women do that. The female engagement teams are another very big example of people being right out there, or the intelligence people, definitely out there doing combat types of things. And now we have the infantry types of roles as well. And women are doing a great job. I don't think combat arms is for everybody, including the men. I think it ought to be based on individuals and what you're physically and mentally capable of doing it. Because there's plenty of jobs in the military. If one doesn't match you, do something else. And I don't think there should be any dishonor. We all serve. I'm primarily ended up being education and training, but I'm the one that makes sure that you're ready to go out in the field to do your job. If I do not do a good job, you do not do a good job.
Right.
So we all work together, and I think teamwork and acceptance of that is real important.
Yeah, and when I enlisted, I was a loadmaster on C-130s in the Air Force, and we deployed once, and we had I think all but one person on the crew was female in
Mhm.
one of our air crews. And I got to fly with that air crew one day, and it was a real fun mission. Great pilots, great navigator, and I had a blast. We certainly didn't care who you were on our airplanes. And now, when you transitioned out, did you have a transition system with resources like we have today?
Not really. Now, I had a medical discharge. I had a problem with my arm. My arm was not usable for a while. I'm doing better now, but I had to have major surgery. Um, so they decided that I wasn't fit for duty, right? And so this was 1990 that I actually got out. So I had the surgery in late 89. And they were going through a downsizing then. And that's what you have to think about. Timing is everything. And at the time, the Cold War had wrapped up. So that was important. We took the wall down in Berlin, all of that kind of stuff that happened in the Reagan era. So we're downsizing. There had been a few skirmishes, like the Falklands and Grenada and stuff like that during the 80s. But by 1990, they were trying to get rid of people, send them home. And that's how come my relatively minor disability was the reason why they were medically discharging me. And so I fought it. I wanted to stay in. And so I was able to manipulate myself into getting a few extra months out of it. But eventually I had to discharge. They really didn't do anything. I did get an exit physical. And I'm glad that I did, because that did help me with applying for disability benefits later.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that at that time, if everybody got one of those. Maybe because I was an officer or something, I knew more about such things. I was in Washington, D.C. So I did ensure that I had that. I hadn't taken advantage of my benefits. Now, at the time, there wasn't the GI Bill. There was a program called VEEP, which was really bad. You had to contribute like $100 a month up to 20 months or something like that. And the payout was minimal. It was terrible. But I was going to college to get a master's degree, actually in counseling at the time. So all I had for income when I first got out was my disability severance pay, which was a kind of a lump sum, because I didn't have enough years in to retire. So I had my lump sum, and I had, my VEEP payment, which was probably only about $300 a month. And I'm a single parent of a special needs child who was in high school at the time. And I thought, who wouldn't want to hire this outstanding Navy lieutenant? And I did register for work. I knew that the Department of Labor had a program of some kind. So I went over there. I was terribly disappointed. They still have the positions, but at the time, you got to remember, technology was just coming in. If you look young to me. So they called it green screens back then. You didn't have color computer monitors. You just had this huge, looked like a TV set, right? And you had to actually be able to program DOS and BASIC to be able to use computers back then. So the technology of what the Department of Labor had was terrible. And also their veterans that they hired to help you actually weren't knowledgeable of the computers. And I used to actually sit out in the waiting room and help other veterans be able to enroll, and they said, oh, do you want a job here? And I said, no, I'm going to college. And besides that, they paid practically nothing for it, because the veterans that they hired were usually ones that had 100% disability and were retired. So it's like the pay was so low that they paid practically nothing. So anyhow, I thought I'd be able to get a job right away. Didn't happen. I finished my degree, did not get a good job right away. So about 5 years, by the time I was out, about 4 years, 1994, I ran out of money. I'd been sending that, carefully, and I did side jobs. I went out and found out that I was a great telemarketer. So I made money as a telemarketer. I had my little GI Bill equivalent, and the money I had saved. I ran out of money. And I actually thought I would have a job someplace. It didn't work out, but I put my house up for sale because I knew I was going to have problems paying the mortgage. I put up my house for sale, sold within a week. All of a sudden, I found myself homeless because I didn't have a house anymore.
That's
and
quick.
at the time, I ended up, I had a little sports car, little red car, you know, and I sold it. I bought myself a van. Again, we're talking 1994. I bought myself a van in case I needed to sleep in it. I got myself a post office box. And there was this other new thing that had just come out called a bag phone. The press, this was like a cell phone back in the day. You know, you plugged it into your car.
Yeah.
And that's actually how I survived for 6 months. I rented, now I didn't sleep in the car. I found a lady through my church to rent me a room. I had my telemarketing job, so I could pay her cash every week under the table, right? No taxes paid on that. And I had my son stay with a friend.
Okay.
And
I was going to ask.
that's how we managed, was he went and stayed with his school friend. I lived in the one room, and I kept on applying for jobs. And it took me about 6 months. I did end up, because I had been consistently applying for jobs, but was there anybody to help me? No, absolutely nothing. So here I am, highly educated, highly experienced, used to doing a lot of big stuff, you know, really not getting any support for it. I ended up getting a job in Atlanta and moving here in March of 95 is when I actually moved down here. And I've been here ever since. I ended up working for the US Department of Labor. I did get some preference points though. I do want to mention that as a federal employee, that is part of how I got the job, was that there had been a mandate to hire disabled veterans. And that's how I got the job. Apparently the Department of Labor at the time was not hiring enough disabled veterans. And so that's why they hired me as much as anything. So the rest is history. But that's my transition story. It was very difficult. So I do understand what it's like to have too much month at the end of your money, because I certainly did.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about a naval officer with that experience, a master's degree,
Sure.
and you're struggling to
Yeah.
find some place
You know,
to
and
live
I
and
was
work.
smart enough to plan ahead. You know, when I saw it coming in time, that I didn't have to deal with foreclosure. I saw it coming enough that I was looking at what I had in the bank, and I did go out and get a crap job to support myself too. You know, a lot of people stay home and whine and cry and wait for the, you know, the sky to fall in. I did take action on my own. And I think that that's one thing that people have to do now, is that it might not be pretty, but there are jobs out there. There's ways to manage. And it's kind of humbling, you know, to call somebody up and say, hey, I can give you a little money towards his food because he's a teenager and he'll eat you out of house and home. But could you let Richard stay with Pat, you know, for a while? And then I just keep on checking back. Is he behaving himself? Is it okay if he keeps on staying? You know, that's a hard thing.
Oh, so how did you go into the behavioral psychological health space then?
Well, that's actually what I did. That's what I went to college for, because I adopted my son. He is a special needs person, and unfortunately has a tragic history of abuse. And he was 12 years old when I took him. I ended up being in therapy a lot with him because of his issues. And I found out that, and you got to also look at how mental health was looked at. We're talking mid to late 80s. And times have changed about how to treat trauma. And this is actually, you know, kind of weaves together. I really do believe God has a plan of how things kind of weave together eventually, because it really awakened me to the idea that they weren't providing good services for my child. And one of the things that, by the way, is that they said, oh, I was a bad person because I was a military officer and I was too rigid and things like that. You know,
Too
I mean,
rigid.
it's very interesting to see the stereotypes that these civilian therapists had about military people. They just assumed that I was having him in the push-up position all the time and things like that, which was total garbage. But, you know, it's very interesting to see that. And I already had a master's, by the way, in educational administration. So I had thought that I was going to go that path. But when I was treated so bad in therapy with my child, I said, you know, I can do a better job than this. And that's when I went and used my VEEP money to go ahead and get a degree in counseling. I said, I can do a better job than these people. And that's how come I ended up actually specializing in adolescent development. And that's actually what I did. I ended up being a counselor, initially providing direct services in a group home. But then I actually, when I moved here to Atlanta, I was with the federal government, but I was a project manager with the Job Corps program, which is, you know, adolescents. It's teenagers, basically, age 16 to 24 that are struggling. And so that was a really good match for me. And so it all came because of my son. And it, informed how I worked with him. And he's a success story today. It wasn't pretty sometimes, but we've made it. We're good now, but it was a challenge.
Well, and then that also took you into, I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, but you had a role with the Guard and Reserve.
Yeah, what happened was that I ended up taking early retirement from the Department of Labor in 2004. Had some family things going on, and I decided quality of life was more important than the money I was making. I was doing very well with the U.S. Department of Labor, and I had learned to save money as much as anything. I mean, so I had a plan, was able to take my pension very early, and I had health care. So that was important enough. And by then my son was out of the house. So 2004, I went ahead and actually I had that counseling license, and I thought, I can do individual stuff. And that's really was my goal when I took the early retirement, was to open a private practice. So I got my license at that time, which by then was required. Earlier, in the early 90s, a license really wasn't a thing. Again, this is how mental health has evolved, that there's a lot more standards and accreditations and expectations. So I went ahead and got my license, and I set up a private practice. But I think everybody, well, hopefully you'll remember, 2008, the sky fell in, right? The economy crashed. And I had my private practice open. I was doing federal contracting, as well as seeing individual clients doing relatively okay, not great, but doing fine. And I realized that I was going to run out of money again. Hey, one time is good enough. I learned my lesson. I went and got myself a full-time job. And I started looking around. And wouldn't you know, timing, and again, I'm a faith-based person. Everything, the stars aligned, is that the opening for the Georgia National Guard was exactly at the time when I was looking for a job. I completely met their requirements. And next thing I know, January 2009, I'm working for the Guard as their first director of psychological health, which was a brand new job, thing for the Guard and Reserve. They had already started offering mental health support to active duty forces. But after 9/11, and so many people had deployed overseas for Iraq, they started realizing that they were starting to use the Guard and Reserve in a way that they had not before. And what happens with Guard and Reserve is you don't go back home to your active duty base, you go back home to Podunk, right? Mm-hmm. Wherever you're from. And there was no support for these men and women going back to their homes of record, right? You'd be in Iraq, and then, the next day you'd be back in Umpty Squat America. With no support. So that's how come they decided to place a behavioral health contractor role into each one of the National Guards across the country. They unfortunately only did one per state. So I should have lived in Delaware or someplace, or Rhode Island, small states. Instead, Georgia is one of the highest number of National Guardsmen in the country. At the time, they had 14,000 Guard members, 11,000 Army, 3,000 to 4,000 Air Guard, plus their dependents. And so that was my job for 3.5 years. And it was a high deploying state. They did deployments to Afghanistan. Unfortunately, not everybody came home from those deployments. It was a very sad time at times. I was very much involved in the yellow ribbon cycles, very challenging at times. Plus, it awakened me to the needs of women in the military too, because I had thought some of the things like discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual assault from the 90s and the 80s, I thought those would have been taken care of by then, and they weren't.
You would hope.
No, and because I could guarantee confidentiality, everybody came and talked to me. It seemed like I worked 24/7. My contract called for me to be available 24/7. And so people would call me during the day, possibly come by my office, but I got just as many calls in the evenings and on weekends. And it really awakened in me a passion for working with veterans again, because I had kind of walked away from it. I had to do what I did at the time, when I was in the Navy, but really was not very affiliated with the military for those years, but working with the Guard made me realize that I needed to have a voice and needed to do something about some of the issues that I was seeing. And that led to me to creating Georgia Military Women. And we now have 4,000 women that are involved in that across the state of Georgia. And again, it's that path that you never expect is going to happen, but when you look back, it all makes sense.
Yeah, and now with that position that you held for the 3.5 years, do you think that it was being utilized enough?
No, actually, it wasn't. No, I mean, was it being utilized? Yes, it was.
But yeah, do you think that
Right.
you had enough people seeking your
Oh,
help and
definitely. No, I
guidance?
was overwhelmed. The problem was that there weren't enough of me. There wasn't enough of me. The
Really?
demand was so high that I actually had to pull back. I tell you, I would have gone bananas even more if I hadn't had the support of the chaplains. Chaplains
Yeah.
got funding to put a lot of chaplain candidates. They weren't even full chaplains, but chaplain candidates on ADOS orders. I really give credit to the Army National Guard chaplains and the Air Force Army Guard chaplains, the Air Force chaplains that I worked with, because they did an outstanding job. And we really set up some triaging of what we could do. I also was able to identify a couple of soldiers that had mental health training and get them put on ADOS orders as well. It was really tough because it really was not enough of me. Now, I can tell you what's happened since I left in 2012 is that now, and it started while I was in, I sketched out a plan on how to do this for them, is that they ended up bringing regular Guard positions in that were behavioral health. Now, that's a little bit different because they were uniformed. And so the difference as a contractor is that my contract allowed total confidentiality, would not be put into medical records. If you go see a behavioral health officer that's actually wearing the uniform, it's a little bit different, right? My goal was that they could come to me confidentially. I could get them support, and there's a lot of different programs through the VA and private organizations where people can get help. There's a lot of resources now that are available that weren't available, but post 9/11, definitely there's a lot of people that want to help. So I would always be able to refer people, get them support. I could do brief therapy usually with them. I wouldn't handle long-term cases. And if people were really ill and needed to be hospitalized, I could make that happen. But that was very rare. It was more typically that people just needed somebody to listen to. The chaplains and I did do suicide runs, though, is that I did spend time talking to people on the telephone usually. That's actually how I'm an early adopter of telehealth, because a lot of times, I was dealing with soldiers and airmen across the state. And I can remember one case, the soldier's on the phone with me and he's in his truck out in the middle of nowhere. And he's upset about, actually, I think I don't remember exactly, but probably broken relationship. And he's got his gun on the seat right next to him. And I got to talk him down. And back then, keep in mind too, it's not that long ago, but there weren't the crisis lines like there are now. There were some, and the state of Georgia did have a behavioral health crisis line, but the military did not have it. Now the VA has a huge structure, one of which is one of the call centers is located right here in Atlanta. So that if you call the VA crisis hotline, you will be able to talk to somebody. But back then there wasn't. So, I look back at it, as seeing how much things have evolved, that there really is no reason why you can't get help. If something's going on, we're going to help you get help. And the other thing is training also people to know how to ask somebody if they need help, because that's the other thing. Don't be afraid. If somebody's having a bad day, having a hard time, going through hard times, say, okay, are you okay? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? We want you to ask that question. And then if they are thinking about that, how can you get them help? The easiest way certainly is the crisis line. That's always available.
And one thing I think that's important is you pointed out at a recent speaking event that I watched that in suicide prevention, the prevention comes before we reach a breaking point, right? So do you think in general we look at suicide prevention in the wrong way? Maybe we're talking about stepping in when it's too late, borderline too late?
Sometimes it's too late. But I'll tell you, suicide is a really hard thing because a lot of times, especially if it's a completed suicide, everybody will say, well, gee, I knew Johnny had problems, but I didn't know it was this bad, right? And then you get into the guilt thing that I wish I had known that there was a problem, because everybody wants to help. If they know, they say, I would have helped that person. A lot of times people, don't really let you know that they're thinking about hurting themselves. And that's how come it's important to ask the question. But when you talk about prevention, actually, one of the things to think about is true early prevention is even before then, before you start noticing somebody's in trouble. And I encourage anybody that's part of the veteran community is to find community. That's really the top thing that you can do, is having a friend that understands you, that gets you, that's been in the military. We all know, you and me too. We've talked some stories, it turns out that, you were in DINFOS, you were a broadcaster in the military, and I was. And so all of a sudden we have a different kind of rapport. Mm-hmm. And it means that if you're having a bad day, you're more likely to talk to me. If I'm having a bad day, I'm more likely to talk to you. So early prevention, true early prevention, is just finding yourself a community of veterans where you feel comfortable. Now, for some people, they say, oh, I'm not going to join the old-timey organizations. And yes, I'm talking the VFW, DAV, AMVETS, and the American Legion. Those were formed during World War II. That was a different generation, and a lot of those guys actually are still there. And you ought to go over there and shake their hand, let them tell some stories, and they would love to hear your stories. But as I said, it's a different generation. What's really cool right now is that there's lots of younger organizations that you may or may not have heard about that would love to have the younger veterans, the post 9/11. I'm a member of all of them. I'm a member of the young ones. I'm a member of the old ones. But there's things like Team Red, White, and Blue. They kind of focus on physical activity. Team Rubicon is wonderful. I love them. They do disaster response. They're the ones they'll grab chainsaws and help them do muck outs and stuff like that. And by the way, as a volunteer, they provide you the t-shirt, they provide you the plane ticket to go to where the hurricane was or something like that. Let's see, Iraq, Afghanistan, Veterans of America, that's a good one. Student Veterans of America at a lot of colleges right now. There's smaller organizations like Georgia Military Women. We're in this state. In the Atlanta area, there's a club called VETLANTA that I'm also on the board of, and that's for men and women, and we're connected up to a lot of corporate entities. Is that if you start looking around, you can find a group that you'll fit into, but you have to take that initiative and come out to job fairs for veterans, come out to resource fairs for veterans, and you'll see the different organizations that are there. And it's great. Let's see, what is it? Blaze Sports is here in Atlanta. They do adaptive sports, which is very cool. So, I can't do certain things because of my disabilities, but hey, they'll find a way for me to do it, right?
Yeah, that's really awesome. There are a lot of options for building community, finding that.
Absolutely. And that's the number one real way to prevent suicide, is having community. So I appreciate any opportunity to talk to audiences such as yours to say, hey, you're not alone. You might think that you are, but you're not. And that was one of the things I really learned for myself. When I started getting back into the community, I started talking about that I was a veteran. Most women, we don't wear the ball caps. I don't have veteran on my forehead. So how would you know I'm a veteran? I'm a short, little, round old lady at this point. Nobody is going to think that I'm a veteran. Well, I started mentioning it, and wouldn't you know, I have a friend that went to my Sunday school class, and I'm talking about something, and all of a sudden I found out that she had been in the Army. I said, what? I never knew. I've known this woman for years, right? Had no idea that she had served, right? And then all of a sudden now we have a different relationship. And I think that you will find that, if identify yourself as a veteran is important, especially a woman veteran. Let people know that you are a veteran, and you'd be surprised. You're going to have a bunch of whole new friends, and it's a great thing.
Well, that's another interesting point that I hadn't considered before. I had a guest a couple episodes ago, Victoria Sechrist. She's actually a therapist as well, and specializes in suicide prevention. but she was telling me that in her transition out of the military,
Right.
that she struggled to find a community in a way. I don't want to speak for her, but
Right.
um, one one thing that she mentioned was going out with her boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
People would assume that he
He was
was the
veteran.
one who had served
Right.
and didn't think anything of her.
Right. Right.
So she had to get over that, or find a way to
Right.
cope with
Well,
that.
and that still is a problem. A lot of times, women are veterans are still invisible, and that's been one of my missions here in the Georgia is to say, hey, wait a second, women serve too, and we have different needs also. I think that's important to recognize is that we are not the same as men. We don't want to be the same, but we are all veterans, and that we should, when and it happens every little bit. There's those free veteran parking spaces over at Lowe's, the big box home
Mhm.
improvement store. Well, it's not uncommon for one of the ladies to park in one of those spots and have somebody confront her and say, "Hey, where's your husband?" And the thing is, hello, I'm the veteran. And in my state, for example, here, we have women veteran license plates now.
Oh, wow.
Very cool. A lot of states have them now. It's been kind of a thing. We encourage people to wear, the T-shirt or something that says "Woman Veterans, I serve too," and things like that, just to raise that awareness. And that's where you find that there are people, because the older organizations tend to be all male, because that's what they were. They had nurses for the most part, and some supply clerks and some things like that, but mostly men. And so when you go into a meeting, they automatically say, "Oh, the auxiliary is meeting down the hall." I've gone to conferences where when I show up, I'm supposed to be the speaker for the main event, right? But they'll send me down to the ladies' meeting. I said, "No, excuse me, I'm a veteran. I'm supposed to talk to your commander, and I'm actually the speaker, coming up." And they say, "Oh, I didn't know that." And it's terrible that women, we still have to do that. But that's the reality of it. I think that certain things are changing. We're much more accepted than that we were, but it's still a struggle.
Yeah, and with the mention earlier of the VFW, I actually I produced a news story while I was stationed in San Angelo at Goodfellow Air Force Base a few years ago.
Right.
That I picked up on this story just sitting in the sauna during PT with a
Right.
couple old guys, and
Right.
we would talk. I mean, they would be in there 3 times a week. I was in there 3 times a week. We would just become friends,
Right.
and they were a part of the VFW that was
Right.
just down the street from the base,
Right.
and they found out I was in public affairs, and they said, "You know what? You can help us out because every Sunday we put on a free breakfast, or it was like every third Sunday of the month, a free breakfast
Right.
for veterans and their families." And they were having so much trouble getting people to come in from just down the road outside the a training base.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, you've got all these young airmen, and it was an intel and firefighting training base. So, I mean, you really have all the branches there,
Right.
but they just couldn't get people to come in and
Mm-hmm.
have free breakfast. And it was great. I went there, I did the story, I hung out with those guys, and
Mm-hmm.
had a good time. But yeah, I could definitely notice then, that was back in 2016, I think, that
Mm-hmm.
there was a struggle by those organizations to
Right. And they're still
bring people in.
I think that they're still viable. And I will tell you that one of the benefits that those big organizations have that were born in the World War as a result of World War II is that they do have a lot of impact in Washington, D.C. They are the ones that help get laws changed. And so, yes, it might be a bunch of old guys, but they're very cool guys, and they're my
Yeah.
friends. And actually, I am a VFW member because I did serve, enough in Korea to count, because that's still considered a combat era type of place. So I actually do have a VFW membership. The guys are cool. I love listening to their stories. But they do have a major function, and they help with the homeless. They help with service projects. It's also a great source of camaraderie, especially among seniors. One of the things, we were talking about suicide earlier. Everybody thinks of suicide as being somebody perhaps that has had a recent combat experience. The suicide rate is actually higher for senior veterans. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that.
Well, it's called post-traumatic stress syndrome as much as anything, but also, in addition to calling it PTSD, it's late onset stress syndrome. So you would be the classic guy. Okay, here you are, a young man, beautiful family. You told me you have 4 kids, including practically a newborn baby at home. You are a busy man. Your head must be twirling sometimes, right?
My wife's head is just spun completely off.
Right. Okay. So, so the thing is, when you're young and you're actively engaged in stuff, in your business and in your family, it's very easy that your head is already full of stuff. And so you can compartmentalize stuff. And that's really what happens a lot of times. Some people have an immediate stress reaction to when bad things happen. Other people, and this also applies to firefighters, sheriff, law enforcement, all of that kind of stuff. They compartmentalize. And that's how you deal with it, right? Because if you've seen something really bad, you don't like to think about it, and you put it in a box inside your head and you lock the box and you don't think about it. Well, flash forward, this might be impossible for you to think about right now because you're young, but someday, hopefully, you're going to be my age and you'll be in your 60s, and you'll be just you and the honey bunch at home, and probably you'll be retired. You won't be going to work every day. You're going to have time on your hands, and those thoughts come back, and all the process. And this is how come therapy earlier rather than later is important. All the what ifs, could have, should haves come bubbling back. And the reality is, I can say that what happened and it was meant to be, but it doesn't always feel that way. You have to each person has to come to their own level of acceptance of whatever happened. And especially if somebody close to you got hurt or killed. I mean, there's like a little videotape that is stored inside your brain that maybe you turned it off for a while, but that doesn't mean it's gone. And involuntarily, sometimes that projector starts twirling again. Mm-hmm. And that's when seniors have the problem, is that because they're not doing the other stuff, they've got time on their hands, and they're headed back to long ago. Remember, senior citizens, tend to not have the short-term memory, but we got the long-term memory. That's what seems to dominate. And so this is actually true, is that senior citizens tend to have more suicide percentage-wise than young ones. So, part of the message on that is, go hang out with a World War II or a Korea War or a Vietnam vet, especially a young veteran that goes and spends time with those guys. It means the world to them. I realize it might feel like a ministry because, they're totally different than you, but they love it when you show up, and it's a good thing to do. Find yourself a way to do that. If you know a senior veteran, or if you don't, go find one. There's lots of opportunities to do that.
Right. Yeah, I would completely agree. That time that I spent with those guys at the VFW in San Angelo, there's a lot of good times. And they want to hear my stories, but their stories, they take the cake.
Oh, yeah. Now, think about all the Medal of Honor winners, is that the Medal of Honor is actually something nobody ever wants to have to get, because that means that they did some really hard things. And I have a lot of great respect for them. When you think about how many Medals of Honor came out of World War II, especially, and Vietnam and such, is that these guys do have amazing stories of what they did, and they don't talk about them. So it's a wonderful opportunity because they're at the stage of life where it is important to talk about it. So if you go and just relax with them, if you drink, have a beer with them. If you don't, have a Diet Coke with them or whatever, right? Lemonade, sit around. It's a great thing.
Now, what about this year? This year is especially different, of course, with the pandemic. So have you noticed anything different I'm not even sure if the VFWs, places like that, are operating at the moment. So in the behavioral health space, is there anything really different from years past that we should be looking out for?
Well, the fraternal organizations, those that have posts and such like that, are starting to open back up with social distancing, but they have been locked down, because, they just can't operate. My VFW is a post that has a bingo hall, and they had to shut it down. They couldn't have their bingo games, which are very important to the people that go to that. And we haven't had post meetings. In fact, tonight is actually, I think, the night that we were supposed to have a post meeting, and I didn't hear anything about it. So I don't, maybe after I'm done with this, I'll have to call them and say, are we having a meeting tonight? But they have to have the space and things like that. They have a great free dinner, by the way. So that's how come I go, is that we got a great cook that does that. So you've had a reduction in meetings in person. That's a big thing right there. And then I've also worked with some of the younger groups, just so you know. The younger groups have actually, are the ones that do more service types of things because they're younger, they can be more physical. And I'm kind of an in-between person as far as I'm not really old. Well, maybe to you I am, but I'm not really young. What those places have decided is that on some of the service opportunities that I do like doing with some of the younger fraternal groups, is that they won't let me because I'm over 65. So they just said because of COVID, they won't let me come. So the posts are all closed, right? For the past several months, the posts have all been closed, so I can't go see the old people. And the young people say I'm too old to hang out with them because of COVID. So that's quite a bind, isn't it?
Yeah, now you're talking about isolating people.
Yeah, and I'm a social person. I like hanging out with people. So, that's how come I'm glad to have Facebook. What I've seen is a lot of online media is that people are doing Zoom and other similar social platforms. Facebook Live has definitely taken off a lot more than it used to. People are learning how to do their own YouTubes and other social media. So you're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff. For me, it's been interesting to see there has been kind of an up and down type of thing on that. Is that what's happening right now is that people are tired of the online stuff. Is that
Yes.
At first, it's taken a while for people to get used to the online platforms. Podcasts have become very interesting. You know that there's a slew of podcasts now. Everybody's doing podcasts.
Millions.
Podcasts. That's the other thing that's happening. So there's a bunch of them. Well, it used to be that there weren't any, right? And now all of a sudden I got all of these things to choose from. And I got to tell you, my calendar is too full. Is that I will accept invitations to things because they're my friends or something, or I think the topic is important. But then when the actual time comes, I'm overscheduled. I got 3 different things, so which podcast do I check, or which webinar or Zoom meeting? And I base it on basically, am I going to be a participant, or am I going to be the one that lurks in the back and I'm not allowed to say anything? I just watch it, right? And I shame to admit it, but I've done like 3 at one time. I've had them all 3 up and running, and I'm checking between the 3 of them, right? Because I'm trying to capture information, and I do care about it, but it's too much. It's kind of overwhelming, and I've actually had to stop accepting some of the invitations because it's way too much. And I think that's one thing with COVID, racial unrest, politics, and everything that's stressors this year, is that you can only do so much. And that's where our nation is right now, is I think really overwhelmed. I am going to be so glad when the elections are over. I try to stay non-political because I serve a great diversity of people, in reaching out to veterans. I want all veterans to feel comfortable talking to me and taking advantage of the resources that I have available, through my connections. But it's a challenge because there's so much stuff there, and people are popping off, getting mad at each other, calling people names, or people are not being employed right now because of COVID. I mean, my personal business shut down to nothing for several months. As a counselor, I was not working at all. I have worked this week for the first time in months myself. So we have a lot of people in financial stress and they need help. And, I've started to do some volunteer work now. There's some organizations that will take me as long as I follow the COVID rules. So I was part of an organization that was passing out food to veterans at our local VA last Friday. They served 250 families, with produce, and that was wonderful. And there were probably about 20 of us that were volunteers helping pass it out. So the world has definitely changed. I'm looking forward to 2021. I think hopefully it will be a lot better than this year has been.
Yeah, again, we can hope things improve. That's still great, though. I mean, it's such a tense environment in this society right now, but you're still able to find pockets of people supporting others.
Right, and that's where the community thing is important, is that realizing all the stuff that I just said. If you're stressed, realize it. And I know that one of the things, a lot of people are turning off the television. Just turn it off. If it's causing you to rev up, and get upset about stuff, turn it off. You don't have to listen to everything. Facebook, you can spend a lot of time on Facebook, and some people are nasty. They call each other names. You don't need to be doing that. Pick the topics that are important to you. Try to be civil. Try not to trigger other people. Be aware of, your opinion is not the only one. Yours might be the right opinion, but the thing is, you can't force it down somebody else's throat. If they're not accepting of it, hey, move on. Don't have an argument in public. There's no need to do that. We have to take care of each other and have each other's back.
Well, and on the topic of social media, I want to ask you about Georgia Military Women and why that has been important. I mean, obviously people find value in it. If you have 4,000 members there in the state of Georgia, right?
Right. Well, it started out of the National Guard. The first members were all members of the National Guard. I started after I left employment there because my company didn't like social media. But you got to understand, technology has changed so much in just the past few years that now people, like the online meetings and using Zoom, like what we're doing today to have this chat, is that at the time it was absolutely forbidden to be online and to have any contact with anybody on social media. And so once I was only employed by myself, which I really like, is that I started doing the Facebook. And it's a way of connecting. That's what I found the value in, is just the fact that you can talk to somebody else who has a shared experience. It's a safe environment to talk about women's stuff without being drowned out. In mixed environments, because there are usually more men than there are women, women's voices often get lost. I mean, that's just the reality. Also, quite frankly, myself, I'm a very short person. The men are taller. They talk over my head and they don't even pay any attention. I have to say, wait a second, I'm down here. But yeah, the online community means that we're able to talk, and it's not really girl talk necessarily, although it sometimes is. It's just regular stuff, asking for information. How can I get my benefits from the VA? What is available for me for resources on getting a job? We share a lot of job leads. So it's just kind of matter of fact stuff. But it's also just building up friendships. We also, outside of the group, have small meetups in the community where I can say, like, I was over in Augusta, Georgia earlier today. I could post something saying, hey, I'm over here. Anybody want to go to lunch? And chances are I'd get a couple of ladies saying, oh yeah, where are you? I'll come over. And it's just camaraderie. That's really what it's all about.
Back to community.
Yeah, back to community. I love it. That's an easy way to serve each other.
And so, of course, this is, we're now in October, which is known as Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We talked a little bit about suicide prevention, which doesn't have to be limited to September by any means.
Right.
So I'm glad we were able to discuss that. But I want to ask a couple things about breast cancer awareness, which is not a topic I'm very familiar with. I did read, though, that in 2009, Walter Reed had conducted a study that found service members to be 40% more likely to develop breast cancer than non-service members.
Right.
So are you able to speak on
any
of that, why that might be?
Doctor, right? I'm not a medical doctor, but I can speak to it a little bit in that, yeah, you got to figure that we are exposed to toxins. So any kind of cancer, we're much more likely to have exposure to. So that's the thing, is that especially women veterans compared to civilian women are definitely higher at risk. Breast cancer is something that men do not like to talk about, but you would be surprised how many men get breast cancer. And, you know, I spoke once at my DAV post or chapter, and yeah, there was somebody there who had had breast cancer. He, as a male, had had both of his breasts removed, which I thought was interesting because, you know, you just don't think about it. And so, you know, if you feel a lump or something that just does not seem to be right, then you need to get it checked out. There's all different kinds of breast issues that people may have. Actually, one of my friends had what's called inflammatory breast disease, which is not a lump. It's that basically she called me up one night and says, Amy, I feel a little uncomfortable about saying this, but my breast has turned red. I don't know why. I said, I don't know why either. But we talked about it. Ended up, I called a friend who had had breast cancer. She set us up with the phone number to call Emory University's Breast Cancer Center, the Winship Center. My friend called there, described her symptoms. They said, come in now, today. I actually took her, they did a biopsy, and she had inflammatory breast cancer. So it's that kind of thing that you need to be aware of. Just to get there sooner is better. We know so much more about breast cancer also, just that there is a genetic component, to be aware of that. So we have genetic components, we have different types of breast disease, and we have exposure to the toxins that we might not have someplace else. And that, you know, again, also I want to mention uterine cancer and testicular cancers, is that I think you were in the sandbox yourself?
I was a couple times.
Okay, so let me ask you, Mike, did you use any kind of insecticide on your uniforms?
Oh yeah.
Okay, are you like some of my friends that told me that they laid their uniforms down on the sand and it saturated them with insecticide?
No, I would not have done that myself.
Well, you know, let me tell you, the bugs got bigger and worse. I guess some of my friends have told me that they actually would do that, is that, you know, they'd get whatever insecticide, I guess, was being issued, and they would actually saturate their uniforms because the bugs were so bad. And then think about that. You're putting that uniform back on close to your junk, men and women getting cancer in those areas that are exposed. It's really true. You know, and I tell you, this is part of the reason to also register for some of the research programs that are done by the VA. There's the Million Veteran Research Program. I don't know if you've heard about that. It's very easy to enroll. You can look it up. Basically, they take a blood sample and ask you some questions, you know, and there's other programs too that, you know, track research. You know, it took forever to prove what happened with Agent Orange, right? And now we're dealing with the sand pits or the burn pits.
The burn pits, right?
The burn pits, right? Okay. Well, okay, the burn pits, you know, because that's more toxins coming in through your mouth, right? But think about it, insecticides, toxins, right? We have learned a lot more about some of the water problems at Camp Lejeune. Also, Fort McClellan, I think in Alabama, which is where a lot of ladies trained, that we're finding more and more that there's certainly evidence, but the evidence needs to be tracked. So if you have an opportunity to contribute to the research, I encourage people to do that, even if you don't need the healthcare at the VA, because you have other kinds of healthcare. If you are a veteran, I want to encourage everyone to sign up for the VA healthcare system. At least go in for an annual physical. You stay active in the system by going in, I think, every 16 to 18 months, and you'll stay in the system. And that way you'll be notified if there's something unique that's going on. Breast cancer, I emphasize that because there are so many women here in the Atlanta area that are taking advantage of their benefits. We have about 38,000 women veterans that live in the greater Atlanta area. There's about 90,000 statewide. What's very unique about Georgia is that at the Atlanta VA Center, about 20,000 of the ladies that live in this area actually are enrolled in VA healthcare. And they have started identifying some issues with breast cancer, especially among women of color. And I want that tracked. I want our ladies to get the best possible care. Right now, the VA does not provide adequate women's health care. And a lot of it has to be the fact that they never expected to have this women probably coming in for services, is that we're kind of overwhelming the service. They don't offer mammography at the VA hospitals for the most part. There's a few places that do. I know of one hospital, they have the machine, but they don't have a mammogram tech that knows how to operate the machine.
Wow.
They send veterans out to the community. In some cases, that's good. In some cases, it's bad. One of the problems is just coordinating the testing results. So if you're sent out for your mammogram, what happens if you get a bad test results? How fast are you going to find out? Or if, or like my friend that had the inflammatory breast disease, unfortunately, she did pass away. It was very, very difficult. Hers advanced very quickly, but she lived for another 5 or 6 years. But as a private citizen, she was able to use her own healthcare insurance to go in and get the biopsy the next day. I think in the VA, that would be just about impossible to do. I can't imagine them being able to do that. It made a difference in her being able to prolong her life. Those are the kinds of things that we need quicker access to. And, you know, you asked about COVID earlier. That's one of the challenges going on right now is so many of the clinics have had to close. You can't get into an appointment. I did my physical this summer by phone, you know, telehealth. You know, the doctor's not touching me. How does she really know, you know, what my physical status is? I can make up whatever I want to make up, right? And that's my physical. Now, fortunately, you know, I'm actually pretty healthy for the most part, but they're not letting people in. I heard that Atlanta is just starting to open up some more of the clinics now. They do have people coming in for acute conditions. I think some of the labs are opening so that you can do some things, but there's a lot of limitations right now. Also, in Atlanta, we have a huge problem with the phone system. The phone system at the VA does not work well. You get placed on hold. You can't even get to the clinic that you want to talk to. And that's been a long-standing problem that is still not fixed. And it's no secret to anybody in Atlanta that goes to the Atlanta VA. So we have a lot of frustrations. I would tell you, though, that the VA is actually overall, I think, doing a better job, is that they have so many more resources. I hate telling people to be patient, that things are going to get better when they're standing there hurting, or they're there and they've been disappointed by a staff member who has been rude to them. I would say that there are still a significant ways to go, but the VA is still my first choice for healthcare for veterans because we already paid for it. You can very easily sign up for VA healthcare, and most veterans are eligible for care. If you had any kind of issue while you were on active duty, that can be taken care of. It's not that hard to get signed up. There's a few people that might not be qualified, but majority of veterans should be able to get healthcare at the VA.
Yeah, and I mean that's a big thing that should be more focused on more when someone is transitioning out. I think is how to navigate the VA system for one thing, and
Absolutely.
handle your claims, right?
Right. Well, claims are different than, and you know, now one of the nice things is that you can do a lot of stuff online. We still do recommend that you take advantage of claims officers. And I will tell you that is another reason for going to the VFW, American Legion, and DAV. DAV, my personal bias, is probably the best for helping you do your claims. Totally free of charge, will help you, but keep in mind that they are volunteers. So some of those posts and chapters are better than others. So you have to find a good one. In the state of Georgia, the Georgia Department of Veteran Services has 52 offices across the state. So we have more access in the rural area, but even in the small communities, you have a paid employee that works for the state that can help you fill out your claim. And I strongly recommend those. There are also people that get paid to write claims that will also take part of your disability compensation. And I would say, be very careful about that. It used to be not allowed, but now there are, what do they call them? Certified claims agents. Some of them will charge you an upfront fee and then take a certain percentage.
Of course there are.
Which I don't like personally, but so I don't recommend those normally, but I would say, yeah, get in touch with your DAV, VFW, American Legion, wherever you are. They're in every state, and probably overseas as well if you're there. Take advantage of those, and also see if your state agency for veteran services, whatever it is called in your state, please take advantage of those. Why not? You serve, it's kind of like workman's comp. It's not, I want to make clear, it is not a gift. Is that the only reason why you will receive compensation from the VA is because something happened to you on active duty. So it's like workman's comp. Think of it that way.
Well, Dr. Stevens, I'm sure you've got like 3 other meetings to get to, maybe a free dinner after this.
I'll have to call up the VFW and see if they're open tonight. Like I tell you, the guy that cooks is a Marine. He's this big burly guy, but he's a great cook. So I don't think that's what he did in the Marines, but it's good Southern cooking. So I'll have to call him up and say, hey, what's cooking?
Sounds good to me. But is there anything else that you would like to speak on that we haven't so far?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be on the podcast, and encourage everybody to reach out to everybody else. That's what we're here for. It is a community. You are never alone unless you want to be. And why be alone when you got friends, like Mike and me, you can get in touch. It's all right.
And so probably the best place for people to find you would be
probably on Facebook, Georgia Military Women. Ladies that live in Georgia, we do have some restrictions on who we let in. We do screen people because it is a private group. But if you live in Georgia and you're a female veteran, please join Georgia Military Women. Professional connections, I'm also on LinkedIn. So that's another great way to reach me. It's Amy M. Stevens. And you can easily find me on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to share with people. I always will share resources and collaborate. I appreciate a lot of different organizations, and we really need to all work together because we all have the same vision and mission, I think, to help others.
Very well said. I appreciate your time for sure, and all of your knowledge and expertise as well. So thank you so much for coming on.
Appreciate it.
And my thanks to Dr. Amy Stevens for her time, her knowledge, her openness on this podcast. You can connect with her on LinkedIn. And if you are a Georgia military woman, consider checking out the Facebook group, Georgia Military Women. You can join more than 4,000 other women veterans in the state of Georgia on that group. You can connect with me as well on LinkedIn and follow me on Twitter at Mike Lahrman, or if you just want podcast-related content only, that's at Lahr Media, Media. Like the Boots Off podcast on Facebook as well, but most importantly, if you want to hear more episodes like this one, subscribe on your favorite podcast provider. Remember to drop your 5-star rating and share it with someone who will find value in this content that we produce here. Thank you so much. To be a guest on the podcast, send me a message anywhere you can find me, or go to lahr.media/contact, lahr.media/contact. We'll be back next week with episode 16 of the Boots Off podcast.